Tomorrow. Welcome to the second hour of Happening Now. I'm John Scott.
And I'm Heather Childers. Thank you for joining us or sticking around either way. Nice to be here. Well, Attorney General Jeff Sessions will testify publicly tomorrow afternoon before the Senate Intelligence Committee to answer some questions raised by Russian interference in the 2016 election. Earlier today, the president held his first full cabinet meeting. He did not answer any of the shouted questions about the investigations, but he did go through his administration's accomplishments so far.
Never has there been a president, with few exceptions, in the case of FDR, he had a major depression to handle, who's passed more legislation, who's done more things than what we've done. We've achieved tremendous success, and I think we've been about as active as you can possibly be, and at a just about record-setting pace.
And joining us now with more, White House correspondent Kevin Corke. Hi, Kevin.
Hey there, Heather, you're right. Just a slow day, right? Another Monday, more talk about the Russia investigation. Listen, coming up at the bottom of the hour, we obviously have the press briefing, and there's no doubt that the Attorney General's pending conversation with congressional lawmakers about so-called Russian meddling during the election will certainly be a topic of discussion. And I think it's interesting, perhaps, what he says, and some would even argue what he doesn't say, could prove to be fairly instructive, if nothing else. Also, critics have wondered if this isn't yet another fishing expedition perpetrated by Democrats, for example, to keep alive the story, which has yet to produce, at this point, any evidence of collusion between the campaign and the Kremlin. Also this afternoon, as you pointed out, we saw the president conducting a meeting with his cabinet, and he used the occasion to suggest that despite the Russia distraction, the White House is hard at work.
I think we've been about as active as you can possibly be. We're achieving these goals by eliminating these job-killing regulations, unlocking American energy, rebuilding our military, pursuing fair and reciprocal trade deals, achieving massive reductions in illegal immigration, transforming the Department of Veterans Affairs, and building a new partnership among nations to defeat terrorism. We have to do. In just a very short time, we're seeing amazing results.
Amazing results, so says the president. Meanwhile, an interesting conversation this morning here on Fox about what the Trump family has faced since the president won the White House. Advisor and first daughter Ivanka on Fox and Friends this morning.
It is hard, and there's a level of viciousness that I was not expecting. I was not expecting the intensity of this experience. But this isn't supposed to be easy. My father and this administration intends to be transformative, and we want to do big, bold things, and we're looking to change the status quo.
Ms. Trump says she is simply keeping her head down and trying to do her very best to do the work of the American people. Don't forget the briefing coming up at the bottom of the hour. And of course, we'll have live coverage for you right here on Fox. But for now, back to you.
We sure will. We'll have it all. Thank you. Kevin Corke live for us.
So Attorney General Jeff Sessions' testimony tomorrow comes just days after a riveting appearance by the fired FBI director, James Comey. Lawmakers are now asking the White House to turn over any tapes of the president's conversations with Comey, while the head of the Republican National Committee calls for an end to the Russia investigations.
We learned a lot from James Comey, that these investigations are going to keep going forward if the Democrats have their way. The American people want it to stop. The Trump administration is working 100% cooperating with all of these investigations, but it needs to end. This is a fishing expedition to try and run out the clock for the Democrats, hoping to make gains in 2018.
Joining us now to discuss, Stephen Dinan, a political reporter for The Washington Times. Stephen, you can see that the president has been trying to change the subject in Washington. Last week was Infrastructure Week. I believe this week it's education or vocational education. But the Senate, especially the Democrats, do not seem to be biting.
Yeah, no, that's right. And look, you know, tomorrow's testimony, I think it was probably a good choice for Sessions to come out and say he would do this publicly. If he'd done this behind closed doors, you would have had even more calls going on in the future for him to actually have a public hearing. This is a chance to at least rip the Band-Aid off of this part of the investigation. Of course, this public testimony tomorrow was prompted by Jim Comey's testimony last week. It'll be interesting to see what new sort of eggs the Attorney General leaves out there to be cracked by yet another hearing in the future. You know, the chain seems to keep going and going.
Yeah, Democrats were outraged during the Obama administration at the Benghazi hearings, for instance. Is this their attempt at payback?
Well, so I don't know about payback, but certainly they're following a very similar playbook. I would also, though, make the comparison, just as Democrats were happy with Hillary Clinton's testimony in that big Benghazi hearing, I guess, what, now 2 years ago, so I think Republicans were fairly pleased with the way that the Comey testimony went, in that there were no major smoking guns out there. In fact, I would say that Comey probably undermined most of the arguments about a legal jeopardy for the administration or for the president in terms of obstruction of justice. Well, it's not clear that you can actually even charge a president with a legal case of obstruction of justice while he's in office. But Comey, I think, undercut whatever argument there was for that out there. We'll see what Sessions does tomorrow. But, you know, for now, I think Republicans emerged from that Comey hearing happier than they were going in, just as Democrats emerged from the Benghazi testimony of Mrs. Clinton happier than going in.
Kellyanne Conway, the president's advisor, said something on Fox and Friends regarding the fact that Democrats don't always see it the same way Republicans do in terms of misbehavior in office. Let me play for you what she had to say.
Senator Dianne Feinstein, of course, a Democrat, saying that she would like to investigate further the fact that Jim Comey admitted under oath that he acceded to the wishes of Attorney General Loretta Lynch. What Senator Feinstein as a Democrat did is very refreshing, because the Democrats now, they basically say the word Russia more than they say America.
Right.
They are obsessive about this. They are obstructionist.
So could we see some kind of an investigation, Stephen, of, you know, former Attorney General Loretta Lynch and her handling of the Clinton investigation?
You've heard calls for her to actually come and testify, just as Sessions is doing. I do think the congressional committees will pursue that. I don't know whether we see a legal case, but I do expect you will see some more from the congressional committees looking into that.
All right. Stephen Dinan, Washington Times. Stephen, thank you.
My pleasure.
A Fox News alert, and there is a ruling from the Ninth Circuit Court on President Trump's travel ban. The Ninth Circuit, obviously based on the West Coast, and the most liberal of the courts, the appeals courts in the nation. In the decision, they write, "We conclude that the president, in issuing the executive order, exceeded the scope of the authority delegated to him by Congress." The case, obviously, is the government's appeal of that lawsuit filed in Hawaii that challenges the president's second travel ban executive order. The district court judge in Hawaii said the order violates the First Amendment, stopped the order from taking effect. The government already filed an appeal to the Supreme Court for a similar challenge coming from Maryland via the Fourth Circuit. So another defeat from the White House, it would appear, from the Ninth Circuit, the most liberal appeals court in the nation. They didn't like the president's revised travel ban. We'll keep you updated and get one of our reporters on it as we are continuing to read through this decision. Heather.
Yep, we're going to have a panel talking about it coming up as well. We are also expecting to hear testimony from Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin on the budget today. Very busy day as GOP lawmakers work on the Senate version of a health care bill. Mike Emanuel is live for us on Capitol Hill with more on that. Hi, Mike.
Heather, good afternoon to you. President Trump talked about health care reform a short time ago, surrounded by his cabinet team, saying he does not expect any Democrats will help.
We expect to get zero. If we had the greatest bill in the history of the world on health care, we wouldn't get one vote from the Democrats because they're obstructionists. That's what they want to do. That's the game.
Big problems for Senate Republicans is the Medicaid expansion. Moderates in the Senate want the Medicaid expansion to be phased out in 7 years. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell so far has offered 3 years. The talks are delicate because with 52 Senate Republicans, McConnell can only afford to lose 2 of his members in order to pass a health care bill. A key Senate Republican expressed confidence in McConnell, but also floated a backup plan.
My advice is, if we can't replace Obamacare by ourselves, to go to the Democrats and say this: 10% of the sick people in this country drive 90% of the cost for all of us. Let's take those 10% of really sick people, put them in a federal managed care system so they'll get better outcomes and save the private sector market. If we can't do this by ourselves, that's a good place to start.
As for Senate Democrats, they've talked about fixing Obamacare, but they don't sound willing to work with Republicans if the focus now is on scrapping the health care law. Today, a key Senate Democrat ripped Republicans for a lack of open hearings and also a lack of transparency.
We may be days or even weeks away from the Republicans moving directly to the floor, a significant bill that would affect tens of millions, even hundreds of millions of Americans, give big tax cuts, cut back on health care, defund Planned Parenthood without a single public hearing. That's also wrong.
Many Republicans I've talked to say doing nothing is not an option, so pressure is building here on Capitol Hill. Heather?
All right, Mike Emanuel, live for us. Thank you.
Fox News Alert, we've just heard from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruling against the president's revised travel ban. So the White House is 0 for 2 in the courts, while the Supreme Court is also hearing arguments on President Trump's executive order. Our political panel weighs in. Plus, we're awaiting the White House briefing. That is set to begin any minute. Now you can be sure this Ninth Circuit ruling will come up. We will bring it to you live when Sean Spicer steps to the microphone. News alert, when the president first suggested that people from 5 majority Muslim countries should not be allowed to travel into the United States until further review, well, that was shot down by the courts. Then the Justice Department came up with another slightly revised edition of the travel ban. That has just been shot down by the Ninth Circuit based on the West Coast. We are continuing to read through the opinion as put forward by the judges of the appeals court. Perhaps not to be, perhaps it was not unexpected by the White House. The Ninth Circuit is the most liberal court in the country. As Greg Jarrett will tell you, it is also the most overturned appellate court in the country. The Supreme Court also is taking a look at the travel ban. We'll have more for you throughout the hour.
That decision from the Supreme Court, not expected. Any word on that today? For more on all this, so let's bring in Leslie Marshall. He's a progressive radio host and Fox News contributor, and Kevin McCullough. He is the conservative radio host for Salem Media Group. Thank you both for joining us. So a lot of breaking news. I know that you were just getting the lowdown on all of it as well. Leslie, I'll start with you. Your take.
Well, as John just said, this is the Ninth Circuit Court. Everyone agrees, the most liberal court in the United States. The Supreme Court is a very different composite, Heather. We're looking at a more conservative court, and even with the most moderate of judges on that group of 9, to be more conservative. So I think even though those on my side of the aisle are very hopeful the Supreme Court will do what all the lower courts have done, they might be disappointed in the decision that will come down, and we will hear about this week most likely. That could be a foreshadowing of phase 2 of the specific litigation within this case.
Yeah, and Kevin, the 3 judges who heard the case in the Ninth Circuit, all appointed by President Clinton. So, as we've been saying, not entirely surprising. What do you expect the next move to be?
I expect the Supreme Court to lift the restriction and allow the ban to be enforced until the bigger issues are determined. In terms of the Ninth Circuit ruling, I'm kind of in Leslie's camp, or as John described, Greg Jarrett's camp. They're the most overturned. That's done so for a reason. The people on the Supreme Court are much more literal about the Constitution, and so they take specifically the powers of the president to enforce who may or may not be allowed to come to this country for any reason as given as being fairly legit. So I think we're going to see the ban lifted to allowed to be enforced until they decide the bigger issues, which I think are still working their way through the lower courts, both the Fourth and the Ninth Circuits.
Yeah, and the bigger issues being the a proper amount of vetting and the process of who is and is not allowed into this country. Let's listen to what Secretary Kelly had to say about it.
The court's injunction has prevented us from implementing a temporary ban on travel by aliens from 6 countries that are in states of civil war, are state sponsors of terrorism, and are basically failed states. They are the same countries identified by the Congress in previous administration in 2015 as nations of great concern. It has nothing to do with religion or skin color or the way they live their lives.
So, Leslie, I know you disagree.
Well, I disagree for a couple of reasons here, Heather. I mean, the dynamics of ISIS, their training, where their camps are located, and where we're seeing terrorists come from and where they're born aren't necessarily these states, these countries, excuse me. As you know, in this country, these are not where the terrorists in this country have hailed from. And as of late, we've seen people more likely, whether they get training in some of these countries, to be born in the UK or to be born in France or to be born elsewhere in Europe, as an example. It doesn't necessarily keep us safer, for one. Two, it also does not speak to more extreme vetting, if you will, in regard to those specifics and stats. And then lastly, we also need to look at, you know, what is going to make us safer. The president talked about disaster, and we haven't seen that from any people from those countries here in the United States in the 128 days.
Kevin, and that is an argument that people are saying right now, that the sense of urgency, if in fact that it was the sense of urgency, what steps have we taken during this interim period to, you know, strengthen vetting procedures?
Yeah, well, part of the people that make that argument are ignoring what the 3/4 of both travel bans consisted of. The purpose of the ban from its very initiation was to do an audit and discovery of our current methodologies, what's working, what's not working, how we need to strengthen different security procedures, how we grade or vet people that come from broken states. If you've been in the state of civil war, like in Syria, for many years, you have a problem finding records. It's not that we're trying to just pigeonhole geography or people groups that we don't like. It's that there's legitimate concerns that there may be security threats here. And what are we doing? So 2/3 to 3/4 of those initial travel bans were to do an audit, a discovery, and a report, to then make recommendations to then strengthen our new procedures, then re-engage immigration at full throttle.
All right. Well, Kevin and Leslie, thank you so much for joining us as breaking news develops. We appreciate your insight on the fly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Heather.
Just a week after the terror attacks in London, police released these images of fake bomb belts worn by the attackers. Why they had them on. Plus, Benjamin Hall with the most recent arrest. We're also just moments away from the White House press briefing. We will take you there live once it begins.
1 year, if you can believe it, since 1 year to the day since the Orlando nightclub massacre. Scores of people have gathered outside the nightclub holding vigils to honor the 49 people who were gunned down there. Orlando officials are declaring this a day of love and kindness. The terror attack was the worst mass shooting in U.S. history. Governor Rick Scott has ordered all flags around the state flown at half-staff.
While that is happening here at home, London police have made another arrest in last weekend's terror attack that left 8 people dead. They also released these images showing the fake suicide bomb belts worn by the attackers to try to maximize fear as they carried out the attacks. Benjamin Hall, live in our London bureau with the latest. Benjamin.
Yeah, hi, John. Over the last few days, police have been releasing more details which suggest the attackers planned a much larger and brutal attack than the one they carried out. And it was only thanks to the quick response of the police that they managed to stop this. Now, as the area around the attack gets back to normal, police are still piecing together the night itself and also the events that led up to it. There are still, though, many questions, not least how the 3 men met. One area of focus is now on a Muslim gym in East London, where the attackers were caught on camera 5 days before the attack. Footage shows the trio laughing and joking outside the Umar gym in Ilford, where one of them, Khurram Butt, worked and where the other arrested men had trained. Also this week, they've released images of the van showing several petrol bombs inside it, ready to use. And it's thought that the attackers were planning on going back to the van, getting those petrol bombs before continuing their spree. As the van was removed, it's now emerged that Khurram Butt, the driver, had tried to rent a bigger one, a 7.5-ton truck, similar to the one used in the Nice attack. But fortunately, his credit card payment was refused. 3 of the victims were killed by the van. 5 were then stabbed to death afterwards. Police also released photographs of the blood-splattered fake suicide belts made from water bottles, which they believe may have been used to deter police in a possible hostage situation and also to induce maximum panic. A makeshift memorial has now sprung up near where the van crashed, and outpourings of grief and solidarity from around the world as people come to terms with the 3rd terror attack in the UK in just 2 months. But at the scene of the attack, things are getting back to normal. Streets around the scene have reopened, and now countless stories of bravery have emerged about people who stood up to the attackers. Now the market itself is reopening and will be fully opened this weekend. But still, those all-important questions. How could 2 of the 3 attackers had hidden in plain sight been allowed to carry this out? And that is a question still haunting the politicians here in the UK. John?
Benjamin Hall in London. Thank you, Benjamin.
And any minute now, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer will take to the podium for the White House press briefing, and we will take you there once the briefing gets started. No doubt a response from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals and their decision that just came in moments ago, so stay with us. Again, at any moment now, and on a busy news day with another appeals court ruling blocking the president's revised travel ban, while the Attorney General prepares to testify tomorrow at an open hearing before the Senate Intelligence Committee to answer questions raised by former FBI Director James Comey in his last testimony last week. Or earlier on Fox & Friends, Ivanka Trump discussed her father's reaction to the Comey testimony.
My father felt very vindicated in all the statements that he's been making and feels incredibly optimistic.
And the Trump administration making it clear that it wants to focus on jobs. Ivanka Trump joining the effort to spread that message.
We're visiting one of the great examples of skill-based learning and skills-based education, a technical school in Wisconsin, which we're very excited about, to talk about the skills gap and to really highlight the fact that there is a viable path other than a 4-year college experience. So really investing in vocational education, skill-based training. There are 6 million available American jobs. So we're constantly hearing from CEOs that they have job openings, but they don't have workers with the skill set they need to fill those jobs.
Right.
So really bridging that gap and bringing experience-based education to the forefront. So apprenticeship, actually, that's the model.
And all of this likely, no doubt, to come up at the White House briefing, and we will bring you that live as soon as it begins. John?
Well, the trial of Michelle Carter now well underway. We've followed this case closely. She's the young woman in Massachusetts accused of manslaughter in the death of her boyfriend. He killed himself by carbon monoxide inhalation after Carter sent him numerous text messages urging him to commit suicide. Carter's defense attorney says he was searching for ways to end his life long before she encouraged him to do it.
Mr. Roy was suicidal for a very, very lengthy period of time. That comes out in his text messages very clearly. She did not have a duty, a legal duty, and therefore any omission to call for assistance is lacking in the evidence at this point.
Our legal panel, Jonna Spilbor, a criminal defense attorney and a former prosecutor, Fox News legal analyst, criminal defense attorney Mercedes Colwin. Mercedes, you know, most people are revolted by what she did. The question is it against the law?
It is when you think about what he had done in the final moments of his life. He was in the car, he had second thoughts, and here's Carter texting, "What are you doing? Get back in the car." When he got out of the car, he had second thoughts about killing himself, and she urged him and goaded him repeatedly to get back in the car to finish himself off, and that's exactly what he did. It's those finite moments when he had second thoughts, got out of the car, that's what's going to ultimately
That meets the definition, in your view, of involuntary manslaughter.
Absolutely. She acted recklessly, and it ended up in this death.
That's a great argument for the prosecution. On the defense side, I mean, we all agree this was just disgusting and horrible. On the defense side, that it is that words via text alone is not weapon enough to satisfy the manslaughter statute, and I have to agree with this, as disgusting as it is. You know, twist this around a little bit, because we could probably all relate to this. Let's say they're boyfriend and girlfriend, and he didn't commit suicide, but instead she texts him and she says, "Come on over to my house, it's midnight." And he says, "I don't know, I had a few beers, I don't really want to get in the car." And he gets in the car and then he kills somebody else. Should the person who said, "Hey, come on over" via text be criminally liable for that? I say no.
But it was a verbal push. I mean, it'd be like me, you know, some guy standing on the edge of the subway tracks, and I give him a little bump onto the tracks in front of a train.
But she's not even in the same room. She's not even in the same town. She's miles away.
But you know what? But that's a great argument, and I love your analogy. But certainly it comes down to this. She's not physically there, but she is texting him to get back in the car, get back in the car, kill yourself, I'll be there for your family, don't you worry, I'll be there. That constant goading, and look, she was brilliant to get rid of that jury, because every one of us in this room all said, your viewers too are like, I can't even believe she did this to this young man.
But the prosecution, I'm sorry, the defense pushed to have the case dismissed, saying there is not enough evidence, and the judge said, no, this case is going forward. That's got to give the defense some pause.
Well, yes and no. It doesn't, in the sense that we always make that motion during a trial and even before a trial, and typically we get shot down. That you have to do it to preserve the appeal. And believe you me, if this case, if she is convicted, this will go straight to an appellate court, because this is such an unusual situation, John. Horrible in every sense. But to not be in the same room with somebody and only text them, where does the personal responsibility start and stop? And this poor kid, this poor victim, was suicidal. Nobody intervened before this. It's horrible all the way around.
But you know
legally,
what?
She's not on the hook.
Blaming the victim, though, is so dangerous. I mean, we were both the defense attorneys, and John and I actually towed that very carefully. The fact that they're loading up and saying he was suicidal anyway, he would have done it ultimately. That could play both ways with that judge.
Right, just the fact that he did. I mean, he started to gas himself with the carbon monoxide, then he climbed out of his truck, texted her, she texts back and says, get back in there, what are you doing? I mean, a word in the other direction saying, you know, your life is worth living, we could have had a different result.
Exactly right.
And both of these people are emotionally troubled.
She is, I don't know, you might say she is stupid, she is cold and unfeeling, she might be a psychopath, but you're saying that that's not necessarily against the law in the state of Massachusetts.
Right. Legally speaking. Here's another interesting fact. In the state of Massachusetts, if I kill you because you verbally provoked me, I can't use your verbal provocation as a defense. It's not going to get me off the hook. So how can words get somebody on the hook if in Massachusetts they won't get you off the hook? That to me seems a little contradictory. That's the law in Massachusetts.
This is all now. This is all cyber. This is all sort of developing. I mean, this is we're in this new age now where it's going to really be developed in the law, where there are going to be cases that are going to push the envelope. If there's ever a case that's going to push the envelope about the impact texting can do and that can ultimately result in someone's death, this may be that case.
Agree, 100%.
We're watching this one very carefully, and we'll certainly let our viewers know what the judge decides. Mercedes, Jana, thank you both.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
And something else we're watching very carefully any minute now. Press Secretary Sean Spicer will take the podium for the White House Daily News Briefing, and we'll take you there once it gets started. Stay with us.
DeVos, along with the president's daughter Ivanka and Reed Cordish from the Office of American Innovation, have been deeply involved in this effort. And Secretary Acosta had the opportunity to address this issue just a few moments ago at the president's first meeting with his fully confirmed cabinet. So I'd like to kick it off by having Secretary Acosta come up, talk to you a little bit about this initiative and take a few questions. With that, Secretary Acosta.
Thank you and good afternoon. I especially want to thank the work that's been done by Ivanka Trump and the Office of American Innovation to develop the proposals that we'll be talking about this week. I'll be traveling with her tomorrow to Wisconsin, where we'll be looking at some excellent programs. Her leadership on this issue has been invaluable. As you know by now, the President will be making an important announcement regarding apprenticeships this week. He'll be visiting the Department of Labor on Wednesday. There are currently 6 million job openings in the United States, vacant jobs that can be filled. This is the highest number of job vacancies ever. A Business Roundtable survey released just last week found that 95% of executives reported problems finding qualified workers. Americans want to work. American companies want to hire. The issue is a mismatch between available jobs and prospective employees' job skills. This skills gap is a particular challenge in some of the fastest growing sectors of the economy, healthcare and information technology. And it also persists in some of the more traditional sectors of the economy. There are currently 360,000 job vacancies in manufacturing. There are 200,000 job vacancies in construction. And with the upcoming plans for infrastructure, those job vacancies in construction are only going to increase. Apprenticeships teach skills needed to bridge this skills gap. An apprenticeship combines a paid work component with an educational component. Apprentices earn while they learn, and in the process, they largely avoid the substantial student debt that you see with higher education today. The most obvious benefit of apprenticeships is a good job. Individuals who complete apprenticeship programs have an average starting salary of about $60,000 a year. 9 out of 10 are employed upon completion of the programs. Both the starting salary and the employment rate are higher than that of traditional college graduates. Apprenticeships are also going to increase to labor productivity. Apprentices hit the ground running. When they start a job, they're more able, more productive, and tend to be more loyal to the employer. Despite these benefits, apprenticeships make only about 3% of the American workforce. This administration will expand apprentices across most, if not all, industries. Higher education, too, should assume responsibility for promoting apprenticeships. Community colleges and four-year colleges have an obligation to work with students to educate them in skills they need to succeed. Demand-driven, experience-based education is not new. It's used to some extent in the healthcare sector. Demand-driven, experience-based education can be improved, and it can be used in a wide variety of sectors to further expand the workforce. Incorporating apprenticeships into 2- and 4-year degree programs would offer students both traditional learning and skills-based learning. And this is particularly important for those students who learn better by doing. President Trump has seen firsthand the success of apprenticeship programs in the building trades, where he's very familiar. The building trades invest nearly $1 billion a year of private money into the apprenticeship program. President Trump has made clear his commitment to expand job opportunities here in America. Apprenticeships is one very important way that President Trump will fulfill that promise. And again, I'm very excited to work with Ivanka Trump and Reed Cordish and the Office of American Innovation as this program goes forward. Questions? Yes. I'm sorry, yes, in the front.
So how exactly do you plan to expand these apprenticeships? Like, what is the government going to do? I guess it's our understanding that it's not necessarily, you're not going to put more money towards these programs. So how are these apprenticeships going to expand?
So if you look in the building trades, there's almost $1 billion that's spent every year, and that's all private sector money. The building trades have put together labor management organizations that jointly invest in these apprenticeship programs because they know, both on the labor side and the management side, that a skilled workforce is critical to the building trades. And that's how it's worked for a number of years. I've talked to several CEOs. Ivanka Trump has spoken to several CEOs. And there's excitement in the business sector. The private-private partnership, where businesses come together with educational institutions to actually focus on demand-driven education, to focus education on the skills that business is demanding, has worked in other sectors and can work throughout the economy. Yes?
So the question is, where exactly do you see these apprenticeships? Because most of the complaints against it is that it's for low-paying jobs and not the higher education jobs that you need, and it amounts to nothing more than indentured servitude.
So that's just factually wrong. If you look at Department of Labor data, the average starting salary for an apprentice is $60,000 a year, and that's higher than a college graduate. You know, I was out in Michigan at the Ford facility. I met with some of the apprentices at the Ford facility, and they love it. They love it. Let me finish. They love it. They are excited about it, and they're being paid a very, very good wage. I should add, though, that you see apprenticeships in white-collar positions as well. There are a number of firms that we're talking to that are looking at it for areas like bookkeeping, accounting. If you look at law schools, for example, there's been conversations, even in law schools, about the need for more experience-based education. The Carnegie Commission came out with a report a number of years ago about the importance of experience-based education in law. So the point I'm making is we need to stop thinking that this is limited to a certain kind of the job sector. Experience-based education works throughout all sectors of the economy. Yes, in the middle right.
Follow-up, if I may, just a quick follow-up.
One follow-up.
Okay, so but is your program geared towards the white-collar jobs or to mostly?
Our program is geared toward, will be geared to all industries and all jobs. The point here is to foster private partnerships between industry and educational institutions so that when students go to a community college, or when students are looking at apprenticeship programs in the building trades or in four-year institutions, when they leave, they have the skills necessary to enter the workforce. In the middle, yes, sir.
Thanks, sir. In the president's budget, talks about work requirements. Also, Congress is talking about some new welfare reform for able-bodied people. Could this sort of integrate into that at all?
Well, certainly, one of the important aspects of this is the portability of credentials. When someone earns a skill, when someone learns a skill, it's important to signal to other employers that this person knows a certain set of skills. And so I should say the emphasis is on high quality apprenticeships, because it's important to not water things down, and it's important to have skills that are portable and that are indicative of quality. Yes, ma'am.
In terms of the overall focus on workforce development, the president's budget contains about 40% cut in all workforce skills programs from the last budget. If workforce development is a priority, why is the president calling for that? And then secondly, my understanding is the budget has about $90 million for apprenticeship programs, which is also what President Obama had requested. How is this expanded?